Have you ever felt trapped in a relationship that drains your soul, leaving you questioning your own sanity? Welcome to Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser, the podcast that shines a light on the dark tactics of abusers and empowers survivors to reclaim their lives. I'm Vanessa Reiser, licensed therapist, author, advocate, and fellow warrior on the path to healing from narcissistic and cult abuse. Joining me for many upcoming episodes is my co-host Dave. We'll unpack each conversation together, diving deeper into narcissistic abuse, cult dynamics, politics, pop culture, and what it all means for real-life healing. Today, we'll hear harrowing stories from survivors, explore the psychology behind these toxic relationships, and share insights and tools to spot red flags, break free, and begin profound healing. This show is for mature audiences and may include upsetting topics like violence. For full content warnings, sources, and resources, check the episode notes. Guest opinions are their own and don't necessarily reflect mine or any affiliated platforms. This podcast is not a substitute for therapy, legal, or medical advice. Today, I'm beyond honored to welcome a truly remarkable guest, Tonia Bales. Tonia is a dedicated nurse anesthetist, a devoted mother and wife, and now an inspiring public speaker, advocate, and author of her new book, When You See It. But her story began in one of the most harrowing chapters imaginable. For nearly a decade, Tonia was married to John Meehan, the man the world came to know as Dirty John, through the Blockbuster podcast and Netflix series. What started as a seemingly promising relationship unraveled into a nightmare of manipulation, deception, addiction, and danger. Tonia endured a tumultuous marriage filled with lies, diversion from his own medical career, and escalating threats, culminating in a bitter 2-year separation and divorce where she fought fiercely through the legal system to protect her 2 daughters. Even after John's dramatic death, when his story exploded into the public eye, Tonia chose not to hide. Instead, she stepped forward, navigating intense media scrutiny, sharing her truth in podcasts, articles, and now her powerful new book, When You See It, How I Outsmarted and Outlasted Dirty John. Today, Tonia speaks to medical professionals about the hidden epidemic of drug diversion in healthcare, and to all of us about surviving life with a dangerous sociopath, spotting red flags early, and reclaiming your power after unimaginable betrayal. Tonia's journey is a masterclass in survival, advocacy, and turning pain into purpose. Okay, let's begin. Hi, Tonia. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, Vanessa. I'm great.
It's so good to see you. I know you just launched this book, which is super exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I thought we would just chat today. I had a couple of questions for you. Some stuff that I think is really compelling about your story is, some of the things that we talk about on this podcast include narcissistic abuse, coercive control, and so many of the people who have gone through that describe having these like red flags in the beginning. And sometimes they can seem like quirky behaviors, almost like kind of like charming even. So what were some things that you saw, if you're comfortable sharing, with John in the beginning when he was either love bombing or he was kind of wearing that mask? Were there things that you remember were like even pink flags in the beginning? Anything that sort of stood out upon reflection that you were like, oh, that's what this was?
Yeah, I like that you called him pink because I usually say yellow. Cautionary flags. But so I like to at least first preface by saying that, this was the late 80s. Nobody that, well, I'm not going to say nobody, but nobody that I knew of was talking about red flags. I mean, I navigated all this without a lot of this language or knowledge. So I do like to say that. So most of what I'm going to tell you is definitely hindsight. I definitely maybe had some things that made me take pause, but I also was up against someone who was calculated in meeting me, calculated in choosing me. And I was just a, Midwest Catholic girl, minding my own business and not even really looking for love at the time. But I happened to meet John on a night that I was out with friends and coworkers, and things from our first meeting that I can see now are the love bombing, his impassioned interest in me, his asking a lot of questions about me, which that feels good, right? I had some new confidence because I never felt really attractive or pretty, growing up, and I had become a nurse, and I got a nose job, honestly, because that really bothered me. And I had some new confidence. And so now here's someone who's paying attention to me, who's very interested in me. And, it felt good that he was interested in me.
Like, ask questions. He was querying you, he was inquisitive,
Right.
and you probably now that he was collecting data.
He was collecting data. Oh, you're Catholic. Oh, I'm Catholic. Oh, you're into medicine. Oh, I like medicine. Things like that, where he could, just basically mirror what I liked and what I was looking for and spit it back. And then you think, oh, I've got a lot of things in common with this person. But, honestly, also, I wasn't that interested in him. I really wasn't looking for a date. I'd never been picked up. And his charm, his persistence, his pushing my boundaries to give him a ride home, I didn't want to do that. I really did not want to do that. And he convinced me to do that. And then, of course, he convinced me to do all kinds of other things that I didn't want to do. So,
Yeah.
I mean, those are the initial pink flags.
Yeah. And it's interesting how they will mirror your hobbies, the things that you like to do, right? Like all of a sudden, some people will report to me that, their abuser in the early stages, the ringtone on their phone was like their favorite song. It's like
Mm,
all of these like moments where you're like, oh, this is my soulmate. This is definitely meant to be because of all of these things that are rather orchestrated and plotted out. But it's interesting how they're also studying. They're getting all of this collateral. What can I exploit? What can I use against you? And the other thing that you say that's really, really compelling is that you were navigating this before the language was really developed in terms of like the social media of it all and everyone talking and using the right words like to describe things like gaslighting and, circular conversations and manipulation. And so you were in some ways there's a crossover from you being somewhat of a pioneer in this space to actually now living to see the fruition in so many ways. Even in his demise, you got to see things from a really early stage to a very kind of interesting perspective, I suppose, for you now, because everybody's talking about it, right? And you got to see just a whole spectrum of things in your experience.
yes. And, part of what makes me very happy is I think he is part of the reason that a lot of people are talking about it. I mean, this podcast was huge. And I've heard on so many different programs, TV shows, even, just on the Leanne Morgan show, Dirty John referenced. So he is well known. He is the standard by which people, talk about bad dates.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. There were probably so many people watching those series and talking about the parallels that they had known
Mhm.
in either a relationship they were in or a family member or a boss or something sort of clicked where it was like, oh, wow, I'm not alone.
Right.
This is going on. That's really true. I know there are so many of them now on Netflix and stuff where we talk about the Tinder swindler and all of these characters like Sarma had, in her abuser and Bad Vegan, but they tend to have this playbook, right? So the same exact thing is going on. But you're right. I mean, that probably was a jump off for so many people to sort of develop an understanding of what this was. So yeah, it's an interesting thing that you kind of had been dealing with this before the language really
Mhm.
is very compelling. What do you think about John having passive aggressive or snarky behaviors? Was he ever sarcastic? I know, like, in listening to some of the ways that he was engaging with you in some of those communications that had, come out, he did sort of have like a smart assery to his communication, at least at one point it sounded like. Was he ever passive aggressive or like snarky?
I mean, I feel like not necessarily with me, but I noticed those behaviors with other people. I think he kind of me with like kid gloves. Like he knew he had a good thing and he really, for the most part, until things went south in front of me, he was very good to me, very kind to me. And, but I noticed behaviors with other people, like quick to want to maybe sue other people or, I mean, that's the only thing I can think of right now. But, he'd gone to law school and I thought, gosh, you're awfully quick to, like one time when the neighbor car on the ice in Ohio hit our mailbox and he was like, all over that, like, well, we should sue them or we should tell them that, it costs more than it did or, just kind of scammy like that. And I'm like, this is our neighbor, so there were, flags like that. But he wasn't really, I wouldn't say he really was that way with me during our relationship before I learned who he really was.
Yeah, because I think that was what I was listening to was in the ending when he was kind of, you were
Oh,
recording him, I suppose, and he was saying things like, yeah, I guess you'll have to find out, and all of this stuff.
yes.
So
Oh, yeah.
a lot of people report that kind of like wise ass.
Mm.
You mentioned like kind of a vindictive behavior. So a lot of my clients will share that their abusers are particularly passive aggressive and snarky, kind of have this sarcastic wit
Okay.
about them.
Yes. So yes, after it flipped and it turned, he was very much like that, but not for a decade.
Mhm.
I mean, this person looked very different after I figured out who he was. And then, he's the one that basically ended the relationship, wanted out of the relationship. And I was trying to figure out why. And then once I started digging and figuring him out, he went hard for me. Instead of just like, if I went out of a relationship, I'm just going to let the other person alone and stay away from them and whatever. He attacked, right? So, I mean, it was
Yeah,
terrible. Well,
this idea of being exposed for them is really treacherous. And that kind of leads me to the next question, which was that, for a lot of my clients, they're always reticent to reach out to either a former partner of their abuser or a former supply or an ex-girlfriend or an ex-wife because they don't know how they'll be received and vice versa. Sometimes people will not want to reach out to the new wife or the new supply or the new girlfriend for the same reasons. Like, how will this be received? How do I warn this person, that they're, sleeping with the enemy kind of a thing? And I put this in my book because it was transformative in my experience for my healing when I was able to reach out to the exes. And there were a few of them. There were three pretty decent support systems just built in that I was so blessed to have because they were receiving of me. They were eager to share and they were worried about me and ended up having these really amazing relationships. But it's not always that way. What was it like for you to come to learn about his new partner and probably the concerns that you had for Debbie and all of the things that went on subsequently?
yeah. So, I mean, Debbie was a long time between the end of John and I and her, and there was another woman in between. Actually, the woman that he left me for, and I did speak with her, and I did warn her, and she was pregnant at the time, and of course that infuriated John and made his behavior towards me so much worse. And I had called his mother. So he was furious about that. That was something I was basically, I'm going to say forbidden. That's a strong word, but he warned me that she wasn't a good person. So talking to people behind his back or in his life made him very angry, made my life basically worse. And I soon realized that although I wanted to warn the world, that what I really needed to do was I needed to not do that. I needed to just stay out of it because I was very scared of John and it was making me less safe. So I stayed out of it. I knew that John had married Deborah, and I just had to, trust that they would figure it out and hopefully stay safe. And a lot of over the years, many women, would figure him out. They would maybe Google him, because by then now you can Google him, and they would find the detective in Ohio, and then they had access to talk to him. So that kept me out of it. And he would warn them. And then he would call me and say, he's at it again, or there's another one, or whatever. So I kind of always knew what was going on, but I was not going to follow him around the country. I just wanted him to go away. And he had gone away as far as seeing the children. And so I just knew I couldn't poke this snake. I just wanted him out of my life.
Yeah. You make a really good point, which is not just that, the new partners or ex-partners won't receive you, but that you'll feel the wrath because they'll come after you. And again, right back to this idea that they do not want to be exposed. They don't want to be found out. They're kind of living in this fantasy world, and any fracturing of that is just an absolute, they'll have a meltdown. There's no way you can fracture the fantasy. They're living like some kind of a story. Was that the case? Did you feel like he was living in kind of like a fantasy world?
Honestly, in those years when we first split and such, I really didn't know what was going on. I was diagnosing him myself. Like, just in speaking with other people, but not necessarily professionals. Like, antisocial personality disorder is all I really could come up with, at the time. And his brain is so different than my brain that I didn't know what he was doing, or why he was doing it, or what his end game was, because my brain doesn't think like that.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point too. I think the first line in my book was when I develop like rapport with my clients, and they're all pretty much suffering, at the hands of these abusive characters, that they have to understand that the brain works differently in these people. And it's really hard for people to understand that at first. It's like, but, why can't you just do this? And they try to apply logic to this kind of a logical brain, and they struggle to get past that barrier. And I think once they get over that, oh, okay, so this brain is working differently, almost like if you were going to just to oversimplify, like a schizophrenic or somebody who has some other, sort of broken or corrupt brain, that's how they think. And it's rather rigid and pathological. So they don't shift away from that. So they, you spend all these years trying to fix it, or so many people do. And it never works out that way at all.
I mean, it was clear to me that John didn't have a conscience, that he didn't care about anyone but himself. He put himself in front of anyone and everyone, including his children. And I came to learn that he didn't care about any consequences of his behavior, and that if someone found out about him, and he would torture you, but he would also just pivot. I think he thought it was fun, and he would just pivot to something else, where most of us aren't like that. If we do something wrong, then we fret about it, we worry about it, we try to make it right. Wasn't dealing with someone like that. He doesn't care, and he doesn't have a long game. He just pivots to the next thing, and that's how he lived decades of his life.
Yeah. Did you mentioned the antisocial personality. Did you ever come to learn about his behavior as a child? Was he ever harming animals, lighting fires, any of the sort of oppositional, defiant disorder behaviors?
No, what his family basically said was that he was a loving, good little kid. Matter of fact, his mom said, "I like to remember him as a child." That there seemed to be some sort of shift during the parents' divorce about that time. And I think John would have been about 14 at that time. I was told by multiple family members that the dad, who was abusive and had bad behavior and conning and schemes and stuff, actually was, cheating on the mom. She eventually had enough and she left. And then the children were sat down by the father and said, "She's leaving because of all of you." And so I think John blamed his mom for the breakup of the family when really it wasn't the mom. I mean, maybe she made the final decision, but it really was the dad's behavior that caused the breakup of the family. And then he just started to get into, with his father, they would do, these schemes for money and lawsuits and insurance fraud. And then John got into the drug thing, selling drugs, not using them as much, people said, but the money of it. His friend at the time, they became gigolos for old women for money. That was a story that the friend said. So I just was a process that occurred, around 14. And I think, based on things that I know I've seen and letters that he wrote his mom, he despised his mother. He didn't really like his father either, but he really despised his mother. And me calling his mother really just set him over the top.
It's interesting. And then whenever, because I've spoken to Deborah and Tara over the years for a variety of different reasons, whether it was for my own validation or just support or for other reasons. And I remember asking Deborah, I didn't ask Tara this because, and for those listening, Deborah was also married to John and Tara's her daughter. I asked her this question and she was very candid with me because a lot of my clients ask me or tell me, I wish my abuser would die. I wish my abuser would die. I just wish he would disappear. And it sounds terrible to hear that unless you go through this, you really don't understand what it feels like to be a prisoner or co-parenting with a psychopath. It's very, very hard because the world doesn't see it and the judicial system certainly doesn't support victims. And I remember asking her, what is it like that he's not here? And she said it was great. She said very candidly, it was great because she knew that he would have tortured her from prison if he had gone to prison. And I really appreciated her answer. It wasn't this thing, God forgive me, I shouldn't think this way, and let me throw myself on the sword. Yeah. She was very honest about the fact that, he was no longer here to torture anyone. And imagine being this person whose daughter ended up, unaliving him in self-defense and the trauma that comes with that and probably the guilt that she has from bringing this person around her daughter who then is subsequently traumatized, saying, I'm very freely, I'm glad he's not here. What was it like for you to find out he wasn't here?
Well, I describe it as, well, the way I found out was I got an email from his sister. And I was actually at work and my phone kind of dinged or whatever. And I glanced over and the notification said John was killed. And my body started to tremble. And I don't know if it was visible or not. And I was finishing a case. So I came out of the case and I read the email and it said, John was killed and, call me or whatever. So I was shaking. It was, just years of, torture and fear and the unknown all kind of, bubbling up. And then, of course, knowing that I was going to have to tell my children because I did call one of the sisters and she told me what happened. And you're not instantly, I mean, I did burst into tears. I wasn't sad that he was dead. I wasn't happy. I just, had an emotional reaction to the whole thing, but as time passed, it does feel bad to say I'm happy he's dead. I mean, because that just doesn't feel like something we're supposed to say, but I am very, very, very relieved. I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore. I don't have to worry that he's coming for my children when they turned, of age, which is what I thought he was going to do. And it is just a huge relief.
Yeah. Thank you for, I know people listening will feel that and understand what you're saying in the the most unjudgmental way because of this idea that they fantasize about having that freedom, right? And it's just a terrible thing that they feel and think and say and worry about, but I think it's validating for them to know that they're not crazy and having that kind of idea. And so thank you for saying that. I really think that that's very liberating for people, because you are right. It's not like we want these things to happen. People are not, eager to see people pass away, certainly in violent ways, etc., or any of the ways. But it really is validating. So many of my clients are, hoping that they would have that freedom, that that moment would come where they have that relief, as you call it.
Right.
So thank you for saying that, because I think it really is validating.
Sure. I
Um,
mean, I expected that something was going to happen. Like I assumed it would be, you know, the father of a woman, the brother of a woman who, basically took him out in revenge. I didn't expect it was going to be, a 5 foot tall little blonde girl. It's kind of in poetic justice. Um, but I didn't expect that John would live a long time. I thought he would overdose or that somebody would kill him. So that part wasn't surprising. And yeah, I mean, all I can say is just relief. And of course, it's not going to happen for most women, unfortunately. Even with John not contacting me for several years, it was always just ill, um, ill at ease, because he threatened on, that Tonia, when you least expect it, it's going to happen. He left me these threatening, messages that he wanted to have me killed, and he would laugh, like, when you least expect it, it's going to happen, and I'll be in Bermuda having as he said, a big fucking Cuba Libre with a 22-year-old when it happens, and the children will be wondering, gee, what happened to mom? So, once somebody says that to you, you don't sleep that great at night,
right,
ever. Yeah.
right. And how did your children receive the information that he was gone?
Well, from me. We weren't in the same cities at the time. Abigail was living with me at home. She was about 16. Emily was away a couple hours away in nursing school, but we were going to be joining her in a few days for what's called a white coat ceremony for nursing students. And I wanted my daughters to be together. I didn't want to call Emily on the phone when she was alone because she had just gotten to this school, didn't know anyone. So I waited. I waited till after her big day was over, and I sat them down and I told them. They had very different reactions because their experience with him was very different. They're almost 5 years apart. They're 4.25 years apart. So Emily was 10 the last time she saw him, and Abigail was 5-ish, 6-ish. And for most of those 6 years, he was in jail. So Abigail didn't have a lot of, contact with him, and Emily did. Emily was old enough to have the disappointments and the lies and the broken promises, and so she was more kind of cynical about it, like this is how this ends, like what a joke, like your life is a joke. And Abigail was more sweet about it, like you could tell that she still just had hoped that maybe someday it was going to be different, and she cried, where Emily kind of scoffed, and Abigail, was tearful. It was a hard thing to have to tell them, but we worked through it. I took the little one to counseling and for a little bit, and we worked through it.
Then I know we talked a little bit about like the kind of developing the language and how you, started this, before that maybe was happening. When did you put the terms together? When did you connect, let's say, coercive control or narcissist or sociopath? When did you first go, oh my God, that's the word?
Yeah. So it was listening to a podcast called Real Crime Profile with Laura Richards. And they had Chris Goffard on the program, and she was using all the language, explaining John. I'm like, this woman has never met him. How does she know all this about him? And it was just hitting home with me, like, yes, 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 all those things. Yeah. So that's when.
How long ago was that? Do you know?
So it was when the podcast first came out and was, very popular. So it would have been 2017. He died in 2016. It would have been 2017.
Okay. And then a lot of times my clients will say, and it was the same for my experience, there was this like big event, let's say, in the relationship where I had a lot of shame for having taken him back. Was there any event that, because sometimes women, well, the data says 7 times it takes for them to get away. Was there an event or events that kind of fell back into it after that you just thought, like, I can't believe I took him back after blank? Was there something that occurred that you kind of, your friends were like, oh no, why did you take him back after this, or anything like that?
Well, that's a loaded kind of question because the only thing I can think of is early in our marriage, I got a phone call from someone who clearly was looking for him, didn't know he was married, and told me that they had slept together. And John was able to talk me out of that. He was able to distract me with something else, pour me. I think he made it up, a story about being abused by his brother and that he had, said something unkind to these girls at school and they were just out to get him. And I wanted to believe him so terribly. I don't think I did believe him, but I wanted to. And there was no way for me to prove whether this story was true or not. And I did disclose it to someone, and I think she probably knew the truth without knowing the truth. And I did stay with him after that and then had 2 children. And, John hid so much from me. I didn't know. I thought we had a normal marriage. But in the end, when I discover that John has lied about his age, about his past, that he's left me for another woman, I never thought to take him back. I didn't want him. He started this relationship on lies, and I would have never married him in the first place. I very fortunately have a career. I have a strong support system, and I was able to use those things to, separate myself from him. And so once I began to learn who exactly he was, I never looked back.
Yeah. I think that's important too. People ask me all the time, how do I avoid these kinds of people? And I always say, you can't. They're all around you. However, if you do develop, as you did, a strong career, a strong support system, the sense of autonomy, they tend to either get bored or frustrated and move on because they're trying to manipulate and mind control and all this stuff. So I try to really coach people on, getting radically independent in their finances and their friendships and their hobbies and their careers and their homes, so that they don't have to, pick themselves off the floor. Because what happens is people will give up their careers, their friends, become isolated, lose all of their finances, and then whoops, like this is a big hole to climb out of. So thank God you had that career. I feel the same way about myself. I think still was a very big fall for me and a big hole to climb out of, but I think it would have been exponentially worse if I did not have that kind of fundamental basis. So that's really important too.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And then what were some silver linings out of all of this? What were the, kind of God winks for you where you thought, well, if I hadn't gone through this, I wouldn't have had this experience? Because I know that plenty of people do have those many silver linings.
Well, I found love again. It was someone who watched the whole thing unfold, so I didn't have to, blindly tell him who my ex was and what happened. That I had someone that helped raise my children. I think a silver lining also is that I've raised 2 beautiful, wonderful children who are in the helping fields. One's a nurse and one is a mental health counselor. I think I've modeled for them that, again, this is not our shame. We have nothing to be ashamed of. This is all on John. And I also think a silver lining is that what I went through is now helping me help and save other women. I mean, how great is that? And I think that's why it's been very important for me to share my story over and over again. I mean, this has been on lots of different platforms, but still, writing a book, there was a lot of healing for me in writing the book. And there will be a lot of people who, read the book that didn't know anything about it because they don't watch Netflix or they don't listen to podcasts. So I'm reaching a lot more people, maybe primarily women, but people with the book. So lots of silver linings, honestly.
Yeah. I remember when I did my run across New Jersey and I met Mark Vicente from the Nexium cult, and he was talking to me about what it was like to be in a cult. And I had this like aha moment where I realized, even as a clinician, that I was in a cult. And I mean, imagine, being 50 years old and discovering something so fundamental, and was really, really a big thing for me to recognize that we were all sort of manipulated, and, the same characteristics of a cult leader are, in these narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths. And that was tremendous. And I remember saying to him in that moment that even he was a silver lining just for having, described it to me that way. And I have bumped into so many people and shared so many of their gifts with my clients, to your point, and tried to like really make a change. And it is important because I had no idea. I went to USC, one of the greatest institutions in all of the land, and studied social policy and became a therapist. And I learned about this on TikTok.
Wow.
So the work that you're doing and the story that you're sharing, it changes lives. I mean, I remember, talking to Dr. Ramini about it, and people were saying to her, like, you've saved my life. You've saved my life. You've saved my life. And she feels very humble about it. And I said, no, you did. You do. And that's what you do. And I had my first client tell me that at a book signing, her mother told me, you saved my daughter's life.
Oh.
And I was,
Yeah.
I mean, it comes full circle, and then you really realize the impact you're having just by having a voice. And that more than anyone, because these things weren't being talked about. So, to see that full circle moment, you must feel that, a millionfold all the time. That's incredible.
Yeah. It's a blessing.
Yeah. So what are some things that you're working on now? I know you wrote the book. I just want to show it to everyone when you see it. And this is available, I'm sure, everywhere.
It is.
It's on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Barnes and Noble, anywhere you can buy a book, you should be able to find it very easily.
And how long did it take you to write the book?
So I had help because I'm not a writer. I was very involved in the process. The story is mine, but she was the creative person who was able to, help write it eloquently and put it in an order in the book that makes it, dramatic and interesting. And it took us close to 2 years. Yeah. She lives in Minneapolis and I live in Georgia. So there's that. A lot of Zoom calls.
Yeah.
And then, but, we were able
for you.
Say that again.
How was it for you? Was it a sort of a cathartic thing? I mean, it must have been also maybe even hard at times.
It was hard. It was cathartic. I can't say enough about how somehow waiting all this time to write it, I found the exact right person to write it with. I mean, I just honestly, looking back, can't think that I could have found anybody any better. It was an amazing experience. She's very much a victim advocate. She treated me wonderfully and my family. And, she deserves 5 stars for that. It was a lot harder than I thought. Even with a ghostwriter, it's a hard process and it's a long process.
Yeah, it is. I know. My book was about 15 months.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, had a ghostwriter. She was brilliant. And it was funny because I think she was a little bit younger. So her perspective was, it's sort of a heavy read. It's a dark kind of topic, right? It's not like my great aunt who's in her 80s, like, oh, I got your book. I'm like, okay, Annie.
Yeah.
It's a heavy read, it's not going to be, kind of like soft and fluffy thing. So I think even dealing with my ghostwriter, she was kind of like, are you sure you want to put this stuff in there? It's like, I'm like, yeah, as intended, it's got to be in there. I mean, it is dark. Some of the things that were not even like sexually, just even clinically, some of the things that some of my clients would describe sexually, not that I was even enduring, they're dark and beyond taboo, right? So it was, a lot of that was heavy. And so, she was kind of clutching her pearls a little bit, and we kind of walked through it together, to your point. But it's great when you have a great collaboration. And then there's the healing piece that comes from having completed this and walked through that journey. I'm sure that was probably really emotional for you to finish and complete the book.
Yes, yes, it definitely was. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I, I just, there's no support if you don't share. And it's not always easy to share. It was hard for me, really to even share with some people because you talked about the shame of things. I had it all. I mean, I was smart. I got my new nose, so now I was pretty. I had a career. I had all the things. I had a husband. We had two great careers and two beautiful children. I had it all. And to then have to share what I didn't have anything. I didn't have anything, was hard, but I also found not a lot of judgment. I found a lot of support, and that's really what got me through it, support with my family, support with my work in my community. And so I just encourage women to take that step to tell someone you trust and to get it going, because you're going to need to get out of this, one way or the other. And you need to figure out how to do that safely. And that sharing is hard, but you're going to find the people who are going to get you through it.
I can't agree more. I mean, it was really helpful. I think a lot of people suffer because also when you're extricating yourself from these environments, sometimes everyone around you is an enabler or a flying monkey. So in some cases, you feel like the black sheep, the odd man out. You're not able to lean on even your friends and family in some cases. And so you do have to find like safe people. It's absolutely imperative that you find people who get it and stay away from people who would, victim blame or shame you or even blame you directly for all of that. So that it's really important to find the safe space for you to lock arms with people who really understand. So I have one more question. It's kind of a fun little thing that my agent and I decided we were going to do on the podcasts. And I'll say this, when I was younger, I used to climb telephone poles in White Plains, New York for 8 years. And, I was young and, it was a kind of a fun job to have. But people who hear this about me, they think it's kind of funny. And they're like, wait, what? You used to climb telephone poles? That's so random. So we have kind of coined this like the telephone pole question. So I guess my question is there something you can share that people would find unique about you that nobody really knows, that hasn't been out there, that people are surprised to learn about you? Anything interesting, quirky, funny that you're willing to share, just like the telephone pole of it all?
Well, I mean, that you said that nobody knows about. I mean, I don't think I have much that people don't know about at this point. I mean, I do live on 15 acres and I have goats and chickens and a big garden, which is a big life change for me in the last 3 years. The only other thing that comes to mind is my first job was at White Castle, and maybe not a lot of people know.
Those are both phenomenal answers, by the way.
They
Thank you
are
for sharing.
okay.
Yeah. Oh my God, wait, if only. What a treat. Now, the problem with that answer is I'm going to be craving it. And that's amazing that you're living. I can see you on social media and the babies and the animals and the things, and it looks really lovely. So that seems like it's a wonderful thing for you.
I live next door. My 2-year-old grandbaby is here every night for dinner. It's a wonderful thing.
So cute.
Yeah.
So, before we wrap up, where can people find you? What are you working on? Any last sort of thoughts?
So I'm on Facebook as Tonia Bales. I can't even say it. Sells is my maiden name, and Tonia Bales on Instagram. And they can follow me there. That's fine. And I do speak. I'm willing to speak at conferences about the book, about my experience. I have spent a great amount of time speaking at anesthesia conferences. I speak on substance use disorder. I'm not an expert at anything, but I do have a lot of experience, living with someone with a substance use disorder that I wasn't aware of. So I use my story to, to educate others within my profession. And other than that, I'm getting ready to plant my garden.
Brilliant. I love that. That's perfect. I got to do that. I got to get a green thumb. I started tomatoes last year. I was really proud of myself. And I was like telling myself, Anthony, I made a tomato happen. So
Yeah, it must come with
awesome.
age. I love watching stuff grow. It's just like amazing.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Tonia, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. And everyone can find you on Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff. But I really appreciate you taking the time.
No, thank you, Vanessa. It's been great. It's great to see you in person.
Yeah.
Sort of in
Great.
person.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser. If this episode resonated with you, or if you recognize any of these patterns in your own life or someone you care about, know that you are not alone and healing is possible. If you found value in this conversation, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us reach more survivors who need to hear these messages. For exclusive bonus content, deeper discussions with Dave and me, and ways to support the show, join us on Patreon or follow along on Instagram or YouTube at Vanessa Reiser LCSW. Until next time, keep choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and walking toward the light. And remember, healing is a radical rebellion, and your peace is the revolution. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.